Please welcome to the stage Mike Cho.
So Tim and I were a bad match from the start. Our entire relationship consisted of me taking the M72 crosstown bus to his apartment off Columbus Avenue, where we would just sit on his couch and watch TV all day. We were obsessed with Trading Spaces, and by we, I don't mean Tim and I mean the entire nation. We would order mediocre takeout, and then we'd go to bed, and the next day I would take the M72 crosstown bus back to my apartment on First Avenue, and that was it. That was our entire relationship. So I was younger then, and I was naive about relationships, but after a while, even I was starting to ask, like, don't couples who date actually do things together? So I must have been making some noises about this because one day, Tim surprises me and says that we're going to a dinner party at his friend Harry's house. And Harry's this older gentleman who lives a few blocks up from Tim. He's about 10 years older than Tim, who is already about 10 years older than I am. And we get to the party, and I'm very nervous about making a good first impression. This is the first time I'm meeting any of Tim's friends. So, of course, the very first thing I do is I spill a full glass of red wine while trying to cut a piece of hard cheese. And immediately around me, all of these 1,000 hands appear with all these napkins and towels. And they clean up the mess. And I hear somebody telling me that Harry's been drinking for hours and he's probably not even going to remember any of this in the morning. So seated around the table is another couple. They were the owners of the 1,000 hands that came out to clean up the mess. This other couple who, like Tim and I, consist of an older white guy and a younger Asian guy. And in the kitchen, there's another young Asian guy who's cooking dinner. And dinner is coq au vin, which is a French dish, and that briefly confuses Harry and the other white guys around the table because coq au vin is a French dish and the chef is Asian. Oh, but Vietnam was a French colony for many years, so that checks out. Oh, but the chef he's not Vietnamese, he's from the Philippines. Oh, but it's all the same general area, isn't it? All of those third world countries in Southeast Asia. Are the Philippines a third world country? Really? Electricity and running water? Really? The last two guests arrive while we're eating dinner. First, there's Aaron, who is another young Asian guy who happens to be Tim's ex before he dated me. And yeah, I've stayed friends with exes in the past. I don't really think that's weird or a big deal. And the last guest is one more young Asian guy who is this actor-comedian who is just stopping in between shows. So for those of you keeping score at home, that's skinny young Asians, 5, old white guys, 3. So we finish eating dinner, and Harry clears the table, and he puts on some music. And just immediately, the Asian guys at the table, they just start screaming. And they get up, and they start dancing. And it's just, so instantaneous. But, looking back, I totally get it. You know, this was the year of Beyonce's first solo album. And, people were still rocking out to Christina Aguilera's Stripped CD. That's the one that had Fighter and Dirty with the 2 R's. So I'm still sitting at the table, just watching them get up and dance. And I'm not joining them because I'm not the dance gay, I've tried, it's just not me. So I'm just still sitting at the dining table, which is off to the side of the room, just watching this impromptu dance floor popping up in this little open area in front of the entryway to the kitchen. And just watching, people doing their spins and voguing and taking turns doing these runway walks and these crazy death drops. And I'm sitting there at the table watching this, and I happen to look over, and I notice that the three white guys have retired to a couch behind me on the other side of the room, and they're sitting there, and they're just watching the show. And Harry whispers something to Tim behind his hand, and Tim laughs and whispers something back, and they're just sitting there and watching the show. And it's at that moment that I realized that this party is not a party for everybody here in this room. This party is for the three white guys back there on the couch. And all the rest of us, we're just the entertainment. So when your relationship exists in as much isolation as Tim's and mine did, it just exists like completely out of context with the rest of the world. And you don't really know how you fit into that other person's life, and you don't really know how the other person fits into yours. But sitting there, seeing Tim on the couch, just watching the show, it's the first time I realized that I'm not even a human being. I'm just the next one on the list. So later that night at Tim's, I'm trying to explain to him in my limited emotional vocabulary, like everything that was wrong with the party. I'm trying to explain to him about exoticism and Orientalism and racial fetishism and also about objectification and disposability. And I'm just not getting through to him. And every word I say, I'm just like digging myself deeper into this hole of whiny and needy. And Tim, he just kind of rolls his eyes like he's heard it all before from people who are smarter and more eloquent than I am. He's just rolling his eyes like, here we go again. But he finally gives one of those, I'm sorry if you were offended, that was not my intention, apologies. And all of these isms that I've been describing, he says that's not him, that's not who he is. And at the time, that was enough for me just to hear him say that, because I was naive about relationships. But as naive as I was about relationships, I knew that relationships are supposed to be about common life goals and shared experiences. But sometimes relationships are also about this person is looking at me and nobody else is looking at me. And what if nobody ever looks at me again? So the weeks go by and summer turns to fall. And one night over mediocre takeout, I'm telling Tim about something that happened to me in fall of the previous year when I was still brand new to the city. That there was this one Sunday morning where I woke up to hear this huge crowd right outside my window, like so loud they could have been inside the apartment itself. And I looked outside and I just see these throngs of people lining the streets like for a parade. And they all have these signs and these balloons and these plastic horns. And it takes me a couple minutes to realize that today's the day of the New York City Marathon and that it's going to be passing directly under my window. And I spend most of the rest of the day just sitting at the window watching this endless stream of runners passing underneath my window and just watching all of these people just cheering for their friends and their coworkers and their families and just for complete strangers. And it was such a rare moment of community and togetherness in a city that to me had felt so cold and indifferent up to that point. And I could only imagine what it would feel like to be surrounded by all of these cheers. Like the city itself was rising up and saying, you can do this. I believe in you. You belong here. So I tell Tim all of this, and I ask him, if I started right now and if I trained and practiced really hard, did he think that maybe one day I would be able to run the marathon? And I ask him that, and I so need him to answer, like, yes, of course you can do this. I will help you. I will cheer for you. I will be waiting for you at the finish line. You can do this. I believe in you. You belong here. But Tim, he just laughs out loud, and he says, you are by far the laziest person I have ever met in my life. Like, you won't even get up off the couch. How are you ever going to run a marathon? Well, in 2010, I ran my first New York City marathon. It took. Thank you. It took a year of training and support of all my friends who didn't even really understand what I was doing, but they encouraged me anyway. And they were people that who supported me, and they were cheering for me along the way, and I saw them cheering for me, and even if I couldn't see them, I still felt the city, I had imagined that the spirit of the city was lifting me up. And I was connecting with all of these strangers who were somehow able to connect with me, who were able to spot me out of a crowd of the one anonymous runner out of 55,000, just being able to connect with me in a way that years ago 2 people couldn't even connect when they were sitting on the same couch together. And I saw the same thing when I ran my second marathon in 2014 and my third one in 2017. And the one person I never saw in any of this was Tim, who will never hear about any of this because he doesn't deserve to, because fuck that guy.